What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome to Leafs Digest. So, basically, since the last video that we posted, I guess even going back to the Game 7 video that we threw up there, a lot of people have been in the comment section going at us about different guys that they want to see off this team. You go from anyone from Freddie Anderson, who's a UFA at the end of this year, even going after management, Sheldon Keefe, Kyle Dubas, Brendan Shanahan, calling for their heads, telling them they need to step down, and then going at depth guys like Pierre Engvall, Mikheyev, calling them useless, garbage, whatever it may be. And then obviously it's going to come down to the big guns on the team who are going to be under the microscope: Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, William Nylander. Well, this year, obviously it happened a couple years ago in the expansion draft, but this year we have a rare circumstance going on in the NHL with another expansion draft. And with that coming up, it presents a lot of opportunity for Kyle Dubas and this management group to move some guys around and potentially open up some cap space, or even just get guys off the books, get guys out of this system that they think may not be a long-term fit here. And now, by no means are we saying that this is something that is going to happen, and it's not something that either of us have heard is going to happen, so we're not going off that. This is strictly based off of, honestly, just a potential move that I kind of came up with on my own, and that something that may work. And I started looking into how this would go down, what this would help with, the rules of the expansion draft. And basically I came to Josh and I said, could we see a trade with Morgan Reilly to the Seattle Kraken? So, I mean, it is a bit out there. I will say that. I mean, we're in lockdown here in Ontario. We're about to get out of it, but still haven't had a haircut. I'm getting a little raggedy, hence the hat going on, Grizzlies hat. And I think my brain is going a little squirrely outside in the sun all day, in like lockdown, not being able to go out and see people. So trade scenarios are just circling in my head, and it's been going on and on. Josh, do you think we could see a Morgan Reilly to the Seattle Kraken trade ahead of the expansion draft?
No, because we don't get better directly from doing that next season. And I know a good point of why to trade him is he's not coming in FA after the season, but we're still in full contention mode. I know it was completely embarrassing and inexcusable what happened to the Leafs this year, but Morgan Reilly's too big of a piece. I don't think we need to build around him like a number one defenseman like we've been trying to do for years, but there's a reason that he's stayed through some really dramatic changes. He's virtually the only guy that was really in that from the team right now that was in that Boston series where we collapsed. So I'd say he brings a little bit of character in that sense. He's still new wave in what we want to be doing out there. I want to keep Morgan Reilly next season. I'd be really surprised to see that trade happen.
Yeah, well, like, I can understand the concept of people wanting him to stay here because of what he means to this team, and I don't overlook that. I think that that's true, and I definitely value that. But I think that from a standpoint of we need to see a shakeup, we need to see a big move go on with this team. Again, like I referenced this in the last pod that I did, just talking about whether or not Keefe and Dubas and Shanahan should be fired, is it's time for the Masai moment. And now when Masai went and traded DeMar DeRozan, it was not loved by Kyle Lowry, who was the other star player on the team. It was his best friend being traded. And I would imagine guys like Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, even probably you go down to like Freddie Anderson, or if he sticks around, but like other guys like that, they would like to see Morgan Reilly stay. And then you go to the fans. I think he's a polarizing player in the fan base, which I would almost say that DeMar DeRozan was in Toronto. Like, there's a lot of fans who just loved him for what he was and what he meant to the city of Toronto, what he meant to the Toronto Raptors. Same as Morgan Reilly. But then there's another portion of the fan base who absolutely hates his guts and wants him out. So I can see where it would be a very polarizing trade in that aspect, but it's something that I agree with you that it doesn't directly make the team better, but I think it opens opportunities for the team to be better. So on top of the fact that it could be a big shakeup for this team, I just want to quickly go through some of the expansion rules coming up here in the expansion draft and why I personally think this could be a potential move, or like something the Leafs may be exploring the option of. Is just that Seattle has the same rules as Vegas. So they'll be picking one player from every club in the NHL, minus Vegas. They won't pick a player from Vegas. And then there's two different ways to draft in the expansion draft here. The first one being you protect, each team gets to protect 7 forwards, 3D, and 1 goalie. So 10 skaters, 1 goalie. Or 8 skaters, any position of your choosing, forwards or D, and 1 goalie. So you either get 7 and 3 and 1 goalie, or 8 skaters, 1 goalie. So the thing that I kind of look at here is that the Leafs are not going to want to go with that first option if Morgan Reilly is still on this roster, because it's well known at this point that they want to protect Rielly, Muzzin, Brody, and Hall. Like, they want all 4 of those guys back here. They want to protect them. So then you look up front. If you're going to protect those 4 guys, the 4 guys that you're going to protect up front are very, very obvious. Now, whether or not you're a fan of this team that wants these 4 guys out, it would be an absolutely insane move for the Toronto Maple Leafs to move on from these guys without getting anything in return. Those guys would be Tavares, Matthews, Marner, Nylander. Like, those are the 4 forwards up front you're going to protect. So,
well, alternatively, though, Philly, in the same situation, we're not really giving up that much if we do protect those guys, because likely it's going to be Engvall and then also Kerfoot, who would be coming off of the Leafs roster and probably going to Seattle at that point, which, in my mind, just on the surface of things, I'm way more okay with than needing to part with a Hall or even a Rielly in some sort of contorted trade with the Kraken.
Yeah, fair. But, like, here's the other thing, though. If that happens, you have to wait until after the expansion draft to attempt to sign certain free agents, as well as guys like Nick Foligno, Zach Hyman. Like, you have to wait to sign them. Zach Bogosian, if they come back, you have to wait until after the expansion draft to sign them. Otherwise, they're going to be eligible for the Kraken to go and poach them from your team, because otherwise they can just be taken in the expansion draft. So if you were to just leave them until afterwards, that's fine, but then you do run the risk of them having the opportunity to go out to someone else. If you go with the option, and here's strictly what I'm thinking is, moving Morgan Reilly out opens up cap space on this roster. It opens up $5 million of cap space. He's a UFA at the end of the season. He's 27 years old, and $5 million AAV. This is a guy who's going to be looking for a pay raise at the end of the season, heading into his 30s. And I'm not sure that the Leafs are going to be able to afford that or fit it within their system. So we could potentially be losing him for nothing 1 year from now anyways.
Yeah, that's a reality. I just think that next year is too valuable, and that feels weird to say after the Leafs get bounced in such a horrendous, unexpected fashion. And side note, I guess the Canadiens are legit, and I don't want to slander Montreal. I think that they are a formidable team, obviously, and Carey Price is a full-blown GOAT, but I did not expect to see them move on like this. So apparently Montreal was quite the playoff-built team, and we didn't know it going into the series, or didn't quite see it going down like that. But I still think next year is too valuable. The Leafs were really, really, really close to getting out of that Montreal series. They should have. There's some mental lapses going on here, and I feel like we're attacking the wrong part of the roster. In my opinion, I'm hearing more of this Marner slander, and that's what's getting to me, where I'm like, maybe we get better through dealing him, because I think that runs the parallel of the Masai DeMar situation a little bit more closely. We're literally going to the top of our depth roster of all of our players that we would keep. Matthews number 1, Marner number 2, typically in theory. I think that's the group that we split up, and it's not going to be Matthews. I'm starting to hear this Marner rumble about moving, because I was skeptical. He's generational talent, but I just don't think he's fitting with the scheme of this team right now. And it's tough to say, because you look at the regular season, you say, of course he fits, but the playoffs have been a different animal for him consistently.
Okay, here's my counter, though. Why would it not be possible to go and move Morgan Reilly for a move that makes this team better right now? That does not have to be the direct move to make this team better. And here's what I mean. Freeing up $5 million in cap space leaves a lot of opportunity come free agency. So whether you go and you try to re-sign Nick Foligno and Zach Hyman and Zach Bogosian and you bring them back, or you look to other free agents across the league, like, let's say, a Dougie Hamilton, or additionally, you make a move like the one you said with Mitch Marner, where he goes out and you pursue a number 1 defenseman, because personally, I think you need a number 1 defenseman to win the Stanley Cup. I think that the last couple have been very evident in that. In you look at Tampa with Victor Hedman. You go to St. Louis with Alex Pietrangelo. I think Pittsburgh's cups were a little bit unique in that they won it a little bit by committee, but it wasn't like they still had a number one in Chris Letang. He is a true number one defenseman in Pittsburgh. I know there was a year where he was hurt, and then there was a year he wasn't as great, but he was still the best defenseman on the Pittsburgh Penguins. And you go again to Washington, John Carlson. Like, these guys all have true number ones, and we don't.
That's true. We don't have a true number one, but I feel like trading our closest thing to a true number one isn't going to get us there necessarily, and especially if that deal needs to go down with the Kraken, because the Kraken they have a plethora of picks to offer up, right? But unless something real unique happens where maybe a third team gets involved or a trade precedes what goes down with the Leafs, then maybe we could see something happen. But I just see the trade scenario with Morgan Reilly ending up in Seattle this upcoming season. I don't think it's very high just because it won't, in all realisticness, get the Leafs better. But that's my opinion on it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that it sets them up well for this expansion draft in terms of being able to protect guys. Because if you move to that model, I could see them going to a scenario where they go to 7 forwards, 3D, where your 7 forwards could be anyone from Tavares, Matthews, Marner, Nylander. You protect Kerfoot, you re-sign Hyman, you throw him on the protection list. And then you could even, if you re-sign, let's say, Foligno, then you throw him on the protection list. Like, no one's going to go out there and try and take Jason Spezza. If you do that, he'll just retire. Like, Seattle's not going to pick him. And then, or Mikheyev, you throw him on there. And then your D are very obvious in Muzzin, Brody, Hall, Jack Campbell's your goalie that you protect. And part of it, too, is I know that someone you had talked about was Pierre Engvall being moved or being picked, and I don't see that being a problem. But I think if you go to the one of option 2 with 4 forwards, 4D, it opens the possibility of Alex Kerfoot, and I know that he's not loved by all fans in Toronto, but I think he played really well in the playoffs, and I think that with a guy who's 26 years old at $3.5 million AAV and 2 years left on his contract, it's more trade value than a guy like Morgan Reilly could possibly be bringing here.
Yeah, I hear you on that, but just in the greater scheme of things, I wouldn't jump the gun to do something with Morgan Reilly out of even the subconscious desire to keep a player like Kerfoot around, because I actually have been relatively high on Kerfoot compared to what the Leafs fan base has dished out at him at times. I actually think he's a guy that can hang in there in physical games and still do his thing. He's definitely not afraid. He's experienced. I like Kerfoot, but I just don't think that losing him is going to hurt us in the greater scheme of things. I don't think it'll necessarily help us unless there's something else coming back in, which I'm sure Kyle Dubas will make sure there is. But I'm less concerned about protecting him. Him and Engvall, I could both completely see leave and be okay with. I think that getting a little bit more grit and spark in the lineup in that spot of Kerfoot, not saying that he can't provide that, just not as effectively, even with the mindset. He doesn't have the size. He's a good player, but I wouldn't hate seeing him leave this Leafs team.
So would you be okay? Like, would you be okay with Morgan Reilly just walking at the end of next year then? Like, are you just looking at this scenario as we run it back next year, same defensive core, no true number one, and Morgan Reilly potentially leaves at the end of next year?
Yeah, but we'll see what happens, because if that happens just naturally, then you got the money to potentially sign up Seth Jones at that point, and that could be a realistic situation. So if we play it out with Morgan Reilly next year, and I mean, to take the Letang example, Morgan Reilly and Letang, kind of like Letang is definitely ahead of him in terms of what he's offering your team, but stylistically, strength comparison, like they're number ones that could fit a similar role. Like I don't see Letang being a guy who goes and takes the toughest defensive assignment and gets 5 stars on it. Like he will occasionally and do well, but he's an offensive defenseman. So is Morgan Reilly. I think you can still get a lot of value out of him, and he's growing still. I know he's getting older, like you said, 27. He at times has been a little bit stagnant as a Leaf, but I think we're coming to that point where guys really, really want to win. And to be quite honest with you, the one person that I noticed hadn't flicked that switch completely yet was Mitchell Marner. Deneau was just taking Matthews' lunch money. Carey Price was a brick wall, but Marner was the attitude issue where I was like, this needs to change. And I brought this, we don't need to talk about this for long, but I got to air this out on the pod. I had a random trade idea, and I thought to myself, there'd be a decent chance that both teams involved would say yeah to that. And I was thinking, you pointed out, the division could get in the way of this, but trading Mitchell-Marner and maybe a player like Sandin to get Jack Eichel. Sounds a little wild, but I like the skill-wise, it's not like, the Marner void can't be filled by a player like Eichel. And then he ups your intensity. He's got proven chemistry with Matthews. He's going to be physical. He's going to be more of a leader than Marner would have ever been. More defensively responsible. I just love it from all these angles. And I think Buffalo at this point, I mean, the guy's so pissed off in Buffalo that if we were to send him a player like Mitchell-Marner, who's sort of generational in his own right, I think he could get it done, especially if he sprinkled the pot with a good prospect.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to think about. I don't know if we want to get into it on this pod. Maybe we'll save that for the next one that we do, break down potential Mitch Marner trade and how that would go down. But honestly, when you go to that, I think that a guy like Rasmus Sandin would not be put into something like that. I think that Rasmus Sandin, if anything, will be someone who will stay here on this Toronto Maple Leafs team for a while and be someone who continues to grow and become like close to, or if not, a true number one defenseman on this team, someone who actually can push them over to that next level. Because honestly, I see Rasmus Sandin's ceiling being higher than Morgan Reilly's in terms of his all-around play and what he can bring to the table. And I can't see the Leafs wanting to part ways with him, especially since Kyle Dubas, he's a Kyle Dubas guy. He's a Brendan Shanahan guy. Like, he's someone that was here under their watch, someone their scouting staff brought in and they drafted themselves. I think Rasmus Sandin is someone they want a part of this team for the long run.
Yeah, we brought up the Kawhi situation, right? It was really tough to take in another situation where we drafted the kid. We brought him up through the system. He was loyal to our management and vice versa. So we thought, but push comes to shove in the business and you move a big piece to get a big piece, which is why, in my opinion, Eichel would be worth a deal like that. But I think the majority of Leafs fans are with you to say that Marner and Sandin would be pricey, but that's just a realistic price I think it would take to get that done.
I just don't see Jack Eichel being that value right now. I don't. He's having a very serious neck injury, like neck surgery in the summer. He's someone who very clearly wants out of Buffalo, and Buffalo can't keep him there. So Buffalo doesn't have that many chips on the table in terms of what they can demand out of a team to get that from them. And then, honestly, I think that a guy like Sandin to be able to throw into that mix would just be too much. I think if you were to look down to Liljegren or draft pick or something along those lines, but honestly, yes, Jack Eichel is a great player, but is he far ahead of what Mitch Marner is right now? I don't know that you could say that he is, especially in terms of points and everything that he's done in the past few seasons, and you throw in Jack Eichel's injury in there. It's not even like you can look and say, oh, well, he's done this in the playoffs, because he hasn't even made the playoffs.
No, the injuries is a relevant factor for sure, but I'll almost take his lack of sample size in the playoffs versus Marner's horrendous, getting very large sample size of playoff failure. And you're right, statistically, to say that we would need to throw in prospects with Marner to get that deal done is ridiculous because he's already getting more points than Eichel. But I look at a player like Eichel, and he's a little bit more built for the sport of hockey, I'll say. He's a physical, confrontational, fire me up kind of player, and that's what we want in the playoffs. That's sort of completely opposite to what Marner is. Marner's great in his own right, but his own right has gotten us nowhere good in the past 4 to 5 seasons of having him around. So in my opinion, it would be a trade that if you could get people talking about and management to sit down to discuss, I think the divisions definitely does make it weird because you don't want to be facing Marner that many times in a season, and then Buffalo vice versa. But I think, honestly, there's value there for both teams.
Yeah, I know. I just have a very hard time thinking that they would trade within the division like that. And the other thing that I think would be problematic would be forward for forward on that scale. When you look at a big trade, for the most part, a team is not looking to move one highly skilled forward for another highly skilled forward with the very similar equivalent cap situations, lack of playoff success. Like, you're not necessarily looking to go like a swap like that in that kind of scenario. To be honest with you, I think that the hole the Leafs have to fill, or the piece that they need to push them to the next level that would really, really help, would be putting a number one defenseman in that defensive core, whether that be to just add to what you already have. You keep Rielly, Brody, Muzzin, Hall, and you just put in a number one there, like someone like Seth Jones. Just as an example, you throw in like a Seth Jones into that as a true number one. That really pushes that defensive core to the next level. And then you look at like your forwards. If you were to subtract Mitch Marner from there and put in supporting characters around them, around Matthews, Tavares, and Nylander, you have yourself a ton of Mitch Marners. You have a ton of William Nylanders. And if you can take a William Nylander at 6.9 rather than a Mitch Marner at 10.9, like, I think you have to take that every day, because it's a free $4 million in cap space. You get better on the back end. You obviously lose talent up front, but you can supplement that with those things that you're looking for that actually translate to playoff success in the gritty players, the hard-nosed guys that up front that actually make more sense, like would make sense in terms of the holes this Toronto team is trying to fill. So I think that if if someone like Mitch Marner is going to go out, it's going to be a defenseman coming back in, because that is more so what this team is looking for at this point.
So, I mean, the contracts make this really complicated, but I think that the real likely candidate here is Seth Jones, because he's on an expiring contract, has repeatedly reminded the Columbus Blue Jackets that he's leaving. Yeah. And he is a true number one versus Rielly, who's a strong two and a fringe one on his best day. So could you see, they're both coming into free agency at the same time. Do you think the Columbus Blue Jackets would consider a defenseman swap, where obviously we're going to need to load it up on our end on what else we would give them? Maybe a Kerfoot. I don't think we can afford to really hand out any more picks, but that could still be an option to get the player that you need. Do you think there could be a bundle that gets Seth Jones into Toronto before his natural free agency next year?
Goody, I think that's a really good question, and I think we're going to have to answer that on the next pod. So we break down Morgan Reilly, potential move to the Seattle Kraken. If we see it shaking out, how we see it would affect this team this year, what it would do in the expansion draft, what the Seattle Kraken would want in that kind of return, what the Leafs could potentially get back if we saw it being a fit. We even got into some Mitch Marner, Jack Eichel, Rasmus Sandin trade talks, if those would be potential moves. But if you want some more trade talks, some more trade speculations, make sure you like, comment, subscribe on our videos. Tell us what trades you want to see. If you think these trades that we proposed in this video were absolutely ridiculous, if you like them, what else you think would have to be involved in these packages. Also, we want to know what holes you think the Leafs have, because there's ones that we see, there's ones we see the media talking about. But what holes do the fans think that this team has? Obviously, the biggest one at this point is being grit players. That's what we've been looking for. That's what everyone kind of thinks we need. But who would you go out there and get? Let us know in the comments. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. And we will see you guys for our next episode, breaking down some more potential trades. See you guys then.